Hi, this is PJ from pjbrune.com, and today I'm going to share with you my 10 tricks for limitless creativity. Now, you can use these creative tricks for making just about anything. So, number one, break out of patterns. Now, one way that we keep ourselves from being creative is following familiar patterns. Our favorite routine, our favorite places to go, our favorite way of doing things, and these patterns keep us from being creative. So you might, people talk about this as getting out of your comfort zone. So it doesn't have to be doing something really uncomfortable. It could just be deciding today I'm not going to go to my favorite restaurant, or I'm going to go somewhere else instead. Or instead of turning left, I'm going to find a different way to get home today. I'm going to eat something different for breakfast. Just and just doing that, you don't have to do that every single day, but it could just be getting in the habit of breaking out of your habits once in a while. That can put your brain into a more creative place, because you'll find yourself very stimulated. It's like going on a trip, and it's very exciting because you're doing something, you're going somewhere that's new, and the people are new, everything is new. So that newness becomes contagious, and it creeps into your creative production. Okay, number two, lower the stakes. I think a lot of times people are not creative because there's a lot of pressure, there's a lot on the line. Maybe you have a deadline, or maybe you have some bills that are due. So life creates these high pressure situations. So how do you lower the stakes so that there's not so much on the line? You're you feel more creative when there's not so much pressure to perform. When the spotlight's not on you. So think about how you can lower the stakes, and that might be a matter of trying some things that I'm going to discuss now, which brings us to number three. Practice iteration. Now, personally, I don't really use this very often, but if you look for the book called The Universal Traveler, almost the entire book is based on this concept of iterating things. So let's say you're trying to design a new product. Instead of trying to design the perfect product, you might set a timer and say, in the next 10 minutes, I'm going to come up with 10 really bad ideas, or 10 10 different variations of the product idea that I have. And that's a way of lowering the stakes, because the pressure is off to do something really good. You're just because you know that most of these ideas that you create will be pretty bad, but there's a chance that one of them will be really great, or one of these ideas that you force yourself to make will have some kind of quality, or maybe one of the quick ideas will give you a better idea, which leads to something that's really great. And you don't necessarily have to use a timer. But sometimes you are in a hurry, so you need to come up with ideas quickly, and that's one way to do it. I highly recommend the book The Universal Traveler if you can find it. I haven't really read it in many years, but it's a good book. Another way to iterate, you can also iterate things that are more serious. And a lot of artists do this, especially painters. They'll do um, a series of paintings can help you develop an idea, and it's a little bit like collecting art might be somewhat like collecting anything else. Usually the first one in the series is the most valuable because that was the creative moment that the artist came up with the series. Um, but usually what an artist will do is they'll come up with an idea and they'll paint that first painting, and then they'll iterate, and then they call that a series. So when you have a show of paintings, usually there's at least 3 paintings, sometimes um, more than that, or many more than that. And how many paintings would you have in an iteration? I mean, that could end up one painting series could end up covering the rest of someone's career, or it might just be um, that series might just take a day, or it might take months, or it might take years. It really depends on. You just keep working that series until you get bored, pretty much, or until you're forced to uh, stop. And there's a lot you can say about iteration, but let's move on to faster, smaller, and simpler. Number 4. So how do you iterate? Um, how do you iterate through a lot of ideas quickly? You have to simplify. So let's say your goal is to write a novel. Instead of writing a whole novel, maybe you set the goal of just writing a short story, or maybe you you just plan to. Maybe you say, instead of writing a novel, I'm just going to write one paragraph that tells the story. And you can even tell a story in one sentence if you're a really good writer. So instead of writing 10 novels, you could just set the goal of writing 10 sentences that tell 10 stories, and then pick the story, pick the sentence that you like the best. So that goes along with the smaller concept, and artists do this. For an artist, instead of doing 10 paintings, you might get a piece of paper and break that piece of paper into a grid. So you have 10 boxes, and then you can do 10 little tiny compositional studies really quickly. And instead of using paint, you could use pencil, which can be easily erased, and because you're not moving your arm around as much, you're getting it done much quicker. Um, Making changes to a painting takes much longer to do as it gets larger. But when you're making changes to a little sketch, all you need to do is just use your eraser, and it's really quick. So that's a common way that artists iterate faster. So number 5, create or teach for X. So X, I made this deliberately mysterious so that you would have to listen to what I was saying. um, so, for example, let's say you have to write something and you're having a hard time um, writing it. You might say, I'm going to pretend that I'm writing this for my best friend, and that could help you write what you need to write. Another thing that you can do is pretend, if you're having a difficulty doing something, pretend that you need to teach a class on how to do whatever it is that you need to do. So in the process of pretending that you need to teach the class, you'll end up teaching yourself, because as you're explaining it to other people, um, in your mind, you'll realize, okay, I know how to do this now. I just needed a different perspective. And this goes along with visualization techniques, which you can do. But essentially, pick someone that you know, or someone that you don't know, that helps you create the type of work that you want to create. And once you have that person in mind, you might always create your work for that person, even though they don't necessarily have to know that you're thinking about them as you're creating that work. Number 6, be ready for inspiration. Now, for artists, a lot of artists will carry around a sketchbook everywhere they go. And this is really, um, if you tell an artist that you're going to need to carry this sketchbook around everywhere you go, at first it seems kind of intimidating. But once you start doing it, once you start carrying that sketchbook around everywhere, you start to realize how useful that is to have, because you never know when you're going to get a good idea. And I think the same goes for writers. Um, have I'm not suggesting that you do it a certain way. Like personally, I always have my phone with me and I can enter in ideas into my smartphone. But there's other times where I'll just carry a pencil and a piece of paper, or I might have a digital voice recorder, depending on what I'm doing. So you just never know when you're going to get an idea. And if you have the idea and you don't have your you don't have your pencil or your recorder available, you're going to really be upset with yourself. And um, that kind of goes with number 1, breaking your patterns. You might be able to create an environment for yourself that invites inspiration. So, for instance, if you find that you get a lot of ideas in the shower, you might want to take more showers. It's just, if you find that you get ideas while you're walking, you might want to see what you can do to enhance that that time that you're spending to bring about your creative ideas. Next is impose artificial limits. I really like this one because you'll really surprise yourself what you can do with just what you have around you. And sometimes I'm just really blown away by what I'm able to create. I remember I was at a party one time, and there was just a random bucket of paint that somebody had left over from remodeling, and I was there was a stick. I think I just found a stick somewhere, and I said to the host of the party, I'm going to make a painting with that stick and that bucket of paint. And, and I did a portrait with that bucket of paint that I just found, and it turned out to be a pretty cool painting. But so just look around you, wherever you are, and you may have access to more materials. You might have access to an entire art store. Um, and sometimes having access to a lot of materials or a lot of options or a lot of opportunities, that can really prevent you from being creative. So sometimes you might just tell yourself, all right, just look around you where you're standing and say, what could I do right now with what I have within my reach? What can I make? Um, and you'll be surprised what you can do with that sometimes. Or you might think more about it. You might think more about how can I limit myself in an interesting way? What can I do to limit myself so that I'm not too limited and I'm not I'm not having too many opportunities. You might find a sweet spot of, let's say you give yourself access to maybe 6 colors and you say, I'm going to make a painting with just these 6 colors, or I'm going to make a painting with just this one brush, or I have these materials and I have all of these materials and I'm just going to pick 2 of them and then introduce something weird like fishing line or sand, and then see what you can do with those limits. Okay, copying. I think Picasso has a famous quote, something about stealing and copying. I don't remember that quote, but essentially, copying is a good way to be creative. And it's very similar to the imposing artificial limits, because by copying someone, you're forcing yourself to limit your idea to whatever it is that you're copying. And what you'll find is that there's no way to make an exact copy. So, I mean, unless that's your goal, but usually when you copy someone, you end up adding your own unique style, or maybe you're copying someone else using different kinds of materials that maybe your materials will be different than the original artist was using. Um, and copying, you could selectively copy something. Like, let's say there's a statue that you really like, but you're mostly interested in the wing, so you could just copy the wing. Um, or you might, let's say you have a favorite painting and then you crop a certain part that you like, and then you can just copy that. So copying, and you don't have to really worry about copyrights, because with art, as long as the copy is they call it transformative. If it's a transformative work, you could copy Mickey Mouse, and you might get sued by Disney, but you'll probably win the lawsuit if if it really came down to that, because this was already decided in court that if the work is sufficiently transformative, then you don't have to worry about copyrights. Um, and copying yourself is a really interesting idea. This is something that artists do, and let's say you do a sketch, and then you turn that sketch into a large painting. That would be copying yourself. But artists will also copy their own finished work. Let's say you do a painting and you like it, you like it so much that you want to copy it, but your goal isn't to make an exact copy, but you might want to make the copy a variation on the original work. You might want to make an improvement. You might want to make different colors. You might want to use different colors. Another thing that Van Gogh used, that one thing that Van Gogh used to do, I'm pretty sure he would paint two paintings at the same time. And this is another way to copy yourself. It's also a way to be more efficient because let's say you mix a certain color blue, and now you have, since you already mixed that color blue, why not do a second painting with the leftover paint? So, because if you were going to start over again and make a copy, you would have to remix that color. So this is sort of like if you wanted to create an assembly line of your creative work, this is something to think about. Another artist I met, I think his name is Jeff Morris. Um, he's probably not a famous artist, but he talked about thinking of making your paintings like pizzas. This is an idea that I think he got from his mom. His mom was an artist, and she said when you want to make a lot of art, think of your paintings like pizzas. So you know how you make a pizza? I guess you just slap on the tomato sauce and start throwing on the ingredients. So those kinds of paintings are horrible to look at, but I think if you were if you were trying, you could make those quote pizza paintings look better. And so if you start thinking about copying in that way, you might come up with some more ideas. Respond and erase. Now, a response is like a copy, like I was saying earlier, but a response might also be a response to an event. Like Picasso painted Guernica, which was that's one of his most famous paintings, and that was a response to the war. So, or you might, there's all kinds of poems that are written to people. Um, you know, you might say that this song was inspired by someone, or it was inspired by an event. Um, so there's different ways to respond to something. You might um, you might just think about that concept or that person or that place, and just thinking about um, whatever that is that you're thinking about can result in your art or your final product having a certain quality. Like, for instance, let's say you're designing a chair and you want the chair to be a response to um, an Art Deco painting. Just by maybe putting a picture of that painting in front of you, that the qualities of that painting might start to work their way into the design of the chair that you're creating. Um, and similar to that is the final one. But before I get to the final one, let's talk about erase. Now this is sort of a weird one, but there was an artist, I think it was Robert Rauschenberg, or it was Jasper Johns, one of those guys, was famously erased one of de Kooning's drawings. So I guess conceptually he wanted to say that this next generation of artists was better, so like they were going to go erase the history of the former generation. But you don't have to think about it in that way. You could just think, let's say in terms of music, um, I'm not a musician, but I think you could take some piece of music that you really like and start subtracting away notes and then see what happens. Or maybe there's a sculpture that you really like, and then you say to yourself, what's essentially what can I take out of this um, to find out what's making it work? Like what is it about the structure that's working? What can I take out of this? So this is essentially erasing. Could just be subtracting. I'm subtracting. Um, Maybe you decide to subtract all of the edges out of something. Maybe you decide to um, just reproduce the shadows. Or maybe a lot of artists will do this. They'll look at maybe a photo of something and they'll subtract all the content out of the photo and they'll just use that photo for the colors. And this is a really good way to learn how to paint in color, is by looking at successful paintings and just ignore the content, ignore all the subject matter, and just focus on what colors were being used. And finally, repeat music. Um, and this goes along with the respond one. Now, if you're listening to the radio, there's going to be several songs playing. And while that can be interesting, like let's say the painting takes you an hour. Over the course of an hour, you might listen to several different songs, which could result in your art having all kinds of different mixed feelings. So, artists are, in particular, Andy Warhol. I think it was Andy Warhol was known for playing a song on repeat hundreds of times. And I think this is common with artists, putting a song on repeat. So maybe there's some feeling about the music that you want to capture in your art, and repeating that music over and over again might be a good way for you to capture that quality that that's difficult to capture just by listening to it once. So those are just 10 tricks that artists use, and I hope those are useful. If you find yourself using any of these tricks and it works out for you, please come back and leave a comment. If you have any criticism, please leave a comment, and I would appreciate that. All right, thanks for listening.